Hello, everyone. I'm glad everybody is here for this March Open Book Club, um, which is a continuation of January's Open Book Club, which is discussion of Hazrat Inayat Khan book, The Mysticism of Sound and Music. The first time we did it, I think we discussed um, the chapter called The Silent Life that's in the book, and um, the majority of the group enjoyed that reading very much, so that we felt it would be um, a good thing to kind of revisit the book itself and just revisit a different chapter from it.
Mhm.
Um, but before we dive in, um, if you are sitting down, or even if you're laying down, whatever it is that you're doing, hopefully you're in a safe space. It's going to just take 1 minute to be here and to be present with each other. I'm just going to take, yeah, maybe a minute, 90 seconds or so. If you can close your eyes or maybe soft gaze and focus your awareness on your breath. As you breathe and as your breath deepens, allow yourself to be here, to let go of the stresses of the day, to let go of the anxieties of tomorrow, and with each breath, allowing for this knowing of the deepest part of yourself to be here. Knowing that there's a connection taking place, even though this is a virtual gathering, there's a connection of hearts that is taking place between each participant. And that at the deepest level, there is no separation. And as we come back into this physical space, we see each other as mirrors, as teachers, as peers, as friends and beloveds. Thank you for being here. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yeah. So Hazrat Inyat Khan, or those of us who may not be as familiar, um, we kind of spoke a little bit about him in January. Um, but he's a mystic that came out of India and came to the West to introduce um, uh, Sufism as a system, but in reality, um, it was just it was another individual who's pointing at the moon, um, and a medium that he used to do that and to bring people um, into that experience and into that knowing of this oneness and this relationship with the deepest parts of themselves. He used music and he used art to do that. So getting when I first learned about Hazrat Inayat Khan, it was really like uh, yeah, it was just this experience of something of this um, cross section between art and spirituality, and seeing it presented in the way that he presented. You know, I was very, very excited to find his work. Um, and since then, I've been, you know, meeting people here and there in a spontaneous way who are somehow associated with the solar system around which Hazrat Inayat Khan and his organization kind of revolve around, you know. Um, you know, so it really is, you know, and he presents great, if not for anything, he presents great contemplation points, um, to kind of, and maybe starting points to dive into what does it mean to create and to be a creator. What does it mean? Which is really is being a human being. Um, and this idea of how it connects with this relationship with the beloved, with source, with the universe, with God. Um, so yeah, this March reading, we chose two small sections, which are um, the influence of works of art and the life the life of thought, which are interesting in how they're coming, like the how they're one after the other, like the way that he presented them. Um, but I'm just gonna dive right into the the kind of first impression of of the reading. And I remember reading this, and the first thing that struck me, especially in chapter 5, which is the influence of works of art, where he presents this idea of art itself having an objective influence or an objective um, feeling that's behind it, that is independent of the intention of the artist and independent of the skill of the artist.
Mm.
like that um that idea, I had to contemplate on that for some time. Like, how can that be a thing, right? And one of the ways that I could relate to it or kind of make sense out of it is, which is still in a subjective way, is when I see people interact with my music and I just watch their body language, and I see what kind of feedback I get from that interaction, of them interacting with my music. And every person gets something different when they hear that, when they hear the music or they hear the beats, right? So I'm interested to hear what does that mean? What does that look like to for an art to have an objective kind of feeling behind it outside of what the intention of the artist put in it, right? Like in the case of my music, I create it with a particular intention, but the way that the listener experience it experiences the music, my intention may be completely, like, it may completely dissolve or may not even be present in um that experience. So like, just seeing that as the first thing that he presented in it, I'm curious to hear what that looks like for us here, because I think all of us here are artists in some way, shape or form. So I'm excited to hear what, if any of you experience something like that, of like, hey, I know people experience my art in a different way. How can my art, first of all, does art have an objective? Does it have an objective outside of influence, outside of the skill, um, life of its own?
Beautifully expressed, bro. Thank you for the way you led us in this discussion and into this meeting. It's very soft leading into it, man. I really appreciate the. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The um the meditation in the beginning, that was a sweet, sweet way to start the meeting. Um, Man, this was a beautiful section of this book. I really enjoyed this reading. Um, but to specifically speak to what you're speaking about now, I remember in the MFA in for poetry that I took at MIU, I had this relationship with my poetry that it was for me. It was for my processing. It was my therapy, the way I did self therapy. It was my sanctuary, and the relationship that my poetry had with the audience, I was cut off from. And it was in that program that I first started understanding and hearing about this concept that, like, your art, whatever it is, takes on its own life once you release it. And you and I become the audience member after I release that art into the world, because it has its own identity, it's its own, it's its own force of nature in the world. And the way others experience it, like you said, may not be the way I wrote it or intended for the impact I wanted it to make. But I think because of the nature of the human mind, the human experience, everyone sees and perceives things through their own lens. We're all our own meaning making machines. And so, because of that, I think art, or whatever it might be, a very nuanced and individual impact on each person. Um, so, I definitely see that. I've experienced that. I even read something one time during that program that the art is not complete until the audience member or the audience or the observer engages with it or sees it. The completion of that art is when the other eyes lay upon it, basically. And I can respect that. I can see and feel that in my own life with my own creations and the impact that like other people's art has had on me. Also, I extended it's so many things to say about this work that here like from as a creator, the power that he speaks about just the act of creation has on our lives and in the world and how um depending on the road we follow it down, it could lead to evolution or destruction. And in that way I looked at like my own life, anyone else's life, or whatever we're creating at any time has that power to do that, to lead to evolution or destruction, whatever piece we're creating. And I think it has both to do with one, the piece that the artwork has, but also the level of consciousness or the lens that the person is looking through to that piece of art from, or that life or whatever. Because when you see art in one place, you sort of begin to see it everywhere. And anyway, I noticed that. That's what I can say for now. So yes, I have had that experience.
Yeah, that's beautiful because the most of it, I mean, I've experienced that where it's like you have, bro, I have beats just sitting on my laptop, right? Like, and we all have, if we create anything, we just have like stuff that we create that never sees the light of day,
Hmm.
right? And you're right, it doesn't feel that it really is complete until it's out there in the open, right?
Hmm.
And people actually are engaging with it. So that I think which is great, um, to something that I think he said somewhere and you mentioned here, which is it's either it's either good, it's either good or evil or bad, but it is not without meaning, right? Like whatever it is, there's meaning somewhere in there that the as a as a as a receiving, as a being an audience, being on the receiving end,
Hmm.
that one can put on the art itself. Now, whether that can be, if it can also, if it can really be an objective, truly objective life, that's what I'm still kind of in a space of contemplation of, right? To look at a piece of painting and be able to find, it's almost kind of being able to find its truth, right? Like the real, just objectively, like this is what it is. Um, and I can imagine that being a whole process in and of itself to be able
Hmm.
to reach something like that.
Hmm.
Um, but from the creation perspective, which is that level of consciousness that you spoke about, as far as where am I right now? At what level of consciousness am I creating this from? And I think he wrote something, or in the questions area, somebody asked like, hey, is it better that somebody should be afraid? Oh no, would not an artist be afraid of making a work that might produce something undesirable? It's one of the questions at the end of that section. And he answered, it is better that he should be afraid, for then he will be careful. And I think maybe the words of afraid and being careful, you know, it's a little whatever, but I think it talks about this level, knowing what level of consciousness, like just having that rise up so that tripping oneself, which I surely did many times, to try to create a work of art that does not match the inward reality of the happenings within me.
Mm.
And it doesn't, it's off. The engagement is off. Um the response or whatever it is, it's just off, right? But that, I think that just speaks to maybe a particular kind of art that's being created rather than the 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 practice sessions that go right into creating that art.
Mhm.
Um,
There's a section in here. I think he directly touches on that a little further down from when you were reading. Let me see what page this is on. One, two. Oh, it's actually on the second page. Um, if I'm listening to what you said correctly, I'll just read the section, this part. He says, this teaches, talking about the art and one's relationship with creating. This teaches us that unconsciously our thoughts and feelings are produced upon all things we use, a place, a rock, a tree, a seat, upon the things we prepare. However, in art, the artist completes the music of his soul, of his mind. It is not produced automatically. It is very often a conscious effort, an effort that results in a certain effect. This shows that it is not enough to learn art or to practice art. In order to complete art, one must understand the psychology of it through which one accomplishes the purpose of one's life. And I think that's directly speaking to that alignment between um, what's true for us, what's honest in what we're creating or what we're doing, in a way that we're aligned with our authentic, most self-expressed, in integrity versions of ourselves with whatever we're creating, whether it's a piece of art or a life that we're living. Like, what's honest? What's our psychology behind it? And does it feel in alignment with our personal evolution?
that's fire. Yeah, I have that highlighted and it's yeah, the psychology of it through which one accomplishes the purpose of one's life. So this conscious effort in order to a medium of completion, a medium of making one whole,
Mhm.
saying that this piece of art, this piece of music, this painting is somehow making me whole or making me closer to this idea of myself.
Mhm. Yeah. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that well, I know we touched on it a few months back, that concept in the Vedic worldview called Dharma. When he speaks about this, I think about that term Dharma. Like, what you're doing, what you're creating, is it a dharmic choice that I'm making? When I'm making art, I'm writing poetry, do I feel like this experience is evolutionary for me? Is it dharmic, in alignment with, all aspects of me, including the impact it's creating? Nas?
So something comes to mind, Osama, when you were saying if something comes out that feels off or it's not right, isn't like to me, the way that it rings is that the fact that it's coming from you, right? The fact that it's a part of your process makes it right. It might not be the final work of art, but I think that there is a play that's there. I think you are going to make marks. And I'll speaking as a visual artist, there are going to be marks made on the page that aren't maybe so great, right? That aren't right. Um, But I tried out some colors, I tried out some textures. It was still something that was coming from me. And just because it wasn't maybe like the end all be all, like masterpiece or whatever, doesn't mean that it was bad, right? Or doesn't mean that it was, or doesn't mean that my consciousness was off or that I am out of alignment. It doesn't mean that at all. I think in my process, that means that I'm searching, right? And I might hit upon something that becomes visually pleasing to many people, right? Like once it comes out of me, I can release it, right? I can choose to throw it in the trash if it's something that I don't think is visually appealing, or I can be like, hey, look what I made, you know? Um, so
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just my comment.
No, that's on point. That is so beautiful. And thank you for that because that search is an honest search, right? To to say uh, the search is an internal search and it's manifesting externally somehow within the painting, right?
Yes.
To say, okay, it's blue or maybe orange or maybe red or maybe a mixture of them. And maybe I'm just gonna test different colors. I'm gonna mix them and see what happens. That search is an honest search. Um, and I think to loosen the grip and allow for play in order to emerge and kind of like when we go to the space and we're playing around with music and the exercise that you made us do with I don't know what it's called but like
Well,
um
bilateral drawing where
bilateral drawing.
yeah.
Amazing. It's like wait, can you explain it?
It looks like this. You take a sheet of paper and preferably put it against a wall so you have it on a hard surface. And you can take a chalk or a crayon or two pencils or whatever in each hand, and you simultaneously make movements and gestures and marks on your page.
Yeah, and that exercise was a beautiful exercise of search, of play. And the images that came out of that were just gorgeous, like absolutely gorgeous and fun. And not only that, but also um intriguing, like no, what's the word? They acted as mirrors. They did really act as mirrors because we at some point we put Naz's drawing, another person that was with us, his name is Ashraf, put his drawing and then put my drawing and just kind of like observe what came out of a 15-minute spontaneous drawing. And it is that search that you're talking about, right? It's just, hey, what color? Okay, green, red. Okay, boom. No second thought really. Um, yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely space for that. And um, to to the point maybe that I was saying earlier that the it's what I was saying I think was is talking about imagine imagine there's a particular sound that's within me or a particular not even sound just being in a particular state um and and let's say that state is sadness or grief or sorrow or something like that and then I kind of like try to force myself in order to create a dance track, right? I might be successful at it, right? But that's the that's the kind of the disconnect. Or in the example that you gave as far as like the art or the drawing, it's going creating something that's, you know, maybe there's a particular color inside that represent a particular state, but putting that aside and saying, no, this is what I'm gonna create because XYZ, whatever external circumstances might be, you know, um, which I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
One
Letitia?
thing, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say the last thing, you can't help but what comes out of you. I don't think it necessarily is possible for you to, I mean, you can make a dance track if you're feeling sad. It might have sad undertones to it, you know, whether or not you're aware of it. So, yeah, that's all. Yeah.
Go ahead, Letitia.
Absolutely.
Um, First of all, I love the jewel around the art needing to be observed. I um I think that's something that I'm going to write down and take, as I'm creating X business or X drawing or whatever. Not that it has to be like Nas says, you can throw it away if you want to, but but I do, I'm really going to take that piece with me after this. But a couple of things that are coming to mind, and you were speaking, Antoine, about the lens. Everyone has a particular lens in which um, they draw this knowledge from. And as you guys are speaking, the best thing that I can relate to as a new mother is these children that I created. um, they say that, okay, how can children be so different if they have the same mother, the same father, but that mother and that father, they were in completely different head spaces, emotional spaces when they created each of those children or when they were raising those children. So that art piece, that child is different, right? Even though somewhat similar inputs um, created created that child. Um, I can't throw my children in the trash. We're not going to do that with the kids. But you do what you can, as things come up, I tell them, hey, I'm winging this right now. So we're gonna we're gonna learn together. We're gonna make marks together, and eventually, um, these art pieces that I'm raising, um, these little humans, they will take flight into the world and um, establish themselves as sovereign beings, and they will interact and engage with the world as they choose to. So, yeah, that's how I. That's how it kind of hits me.
Wow. That was so spot on. Thank you for that. And it's such a yeah, the way that you described it, and it's a constant iteration. It's a living thing that's I mean, yeah, your kids are a living thing, like, but like it's a constant happening, you know. Um and it is probably the same with with art that are not children. Um but wow, yeah. Thank you so much, Leticia. That was perfect. That was perfect. Kareem.
Thank you, thank you. And sorry if I seem like not in the same place because I have a lot of back pain, so standing, sitting, you know. One thought that came to my mind, and it's a slightly different thought than it seems the intended thought. And this is coming from my own experience growing up and not being encouraged to do art. So quite often it was very difficult for me to give myself the freedom to create something. And so for me, sometimes when I see something, and I guess it helps if you have like different perspectives. It's not just what has been created, but also what has not been created at the same time. Because sometimes it seems to me maybe there's like a moral element to something or whatever it is. So it's like a choice that had to be made. There's a fork in the road and somebody chose this or that. You know what I mean? Now, a lot of times it doesn't happen to be that way, but I always think like what's not on the sheet equally as important as what's on it. I don't know if that makes any sense or if that complicates things. I don't know. I tend to complicate things unnecessarily. But I was just thinking when people are talking about the intention of doing things, and all I could think of was my struggles to create something. And I thought I intentionally didn't put things in. So I wonder if other people intentionally not put things on because they feel some type of way, or I don't know. It just got me thinking the difference between what's on it and what's not on it. And given like the reading talked about something to that effect as to like if the artist had their intentions for somebody to know that let you know or something to that effect. I remember reading and it's like, yeah, so I just think like to contextualize that piece of art or whatever that thing could be kids or whatever, not just in that thing, but in a larger bowl where it has other elements to it. And then I wonder like, how would that be perceived given, a different narrative that could be inserted or a different context that that piece of thing, art, whatever, could be placed in and how that would change our conceptualizing of this, you know what I mean? Art, you know what I mean? Could be like something that's very benign for someone, but for another culture, it could be like something highly offensive. And now all of a sudden the meaning of it changes, despite the fact that the artist had no intention of doing anything bad because it's whatever, just the way things are. So, anyways, that was my reflection. Yeah. Thank you.
Really amazing reflection. I like this idea of sometime we're looking at and noticing what's not on the paper or what's not being expressed or what's not being created. There's this concept, and I don't know that this concept fits perfectly to what you described, but at least it makes me think of it, this concept of like the gap, um, or the unmanifest or the silence, and how, it's the silence on the in the music piece, let's say, or in the piano, it's the silent gaps that allow the harmony or the music to really flow out. It's what's missing that allows the music to really become something. Or it's the blank canvas for the painter or something, this open space of possibilities that allows for something to be expressed or shown on it. It's something about the silence or the gaps or what's missing that oftentimes is equally important in what's being expressed, just as the actual con- content, or you can even look at it as the relationship between context and content, right? Oftentimes in conversation, in so many other ways, there's a context that's being spoken. No, I'm sorry. There's a content that's being spoken, but what's behind that content is a context that often could be subconscious or goes that's invisible. That speaks to this miscommunication that we have, whether it's in art or in our everyday language or relationships and stuff like that. There's something very powerful about this idea of what's not expressed is also just as powerful and just as prominent as what's being expressed, whether it's art or anything that is extending out from art. This other concept that I read one time, that like, what did they say? Our words are something like 7 to 10% of our overall communication, and then like this maybe 98% is vocal tone and micro expressions and other things that they say speak louder than the actual words that we're using. So anyway, I'm just saying all that to just relate to this concept of what's not being expressed or what hasn't been created somehow also being just as loud as what's been created.
I get it. It makes sense. It's sort of like I think what you're saying earlier on is if you're playing in music, if the two tones, whatever, or whatever the music thing, I don't know much about it. Like if they're too close to each other, it changes the way the sound, the music sounds. It's like, but if you separate them enough, you get a different effect than them coming in quick succession, you know? And even like in writing itself, there's like, well, when I used to take ESL, there was a lot of these sentences where like they put a comma in, and all of a sudden the meaning of the whole sentence changes. So it depends on like where you keep yourself quiet when you're making the sentence that changed whatever the meaning that was there. So they were all things that are embedded within that, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is David just shared in the chat section, dissonance versus harmony, right? And um, which is spot on in the not just in a music sense, but even just in general, right? This dissonance versus when things are in harmony. And possibly, and I think this is what Inayat Khan, Hazrat Inayat Khan also, he's big on harmony. He's describing this entire, entire path, right? As a path towards harmony. Um, and this idea that Antoine, you shared earlier, this part of the reading where it's a conscious effort, right? To move towards harmony is a conscious effort because one of the laws in nature is entropy, which is chaos. And it's not to say that chaos doesn't mean harmony, but this entropy, this constant fragmentation that's going on. And harmony itself requires this conscious effort in order to put. So, and you're right, David, one can't know one without the other, right? It's like, the same, it's the flip side, right, of the same coin. Now, to your point, Kareem, as far as um, consciously choosing to put something or not to put something, I think this goes back to what Naz was saying, as far as even if like if I didn't put something in unconsciously, somehow it still finds its way through and it seeps through into the art, even if it's done unconsciously. Um, but hopefully the goal is to make these decisions, whether it's, creating art or whatever actual decisions, this kind of goes into the second chapter that we read of life, and I mean, thought and life, and the responsibility of these actions, um, consciously taking these actions. Um, but yeah, I feel also to Naz's point that somehow it kind of finds its way through. Um, yeah, and it's part of that truth that constantly seeks to manifest. Letitia,
I wanted to piggyback off of Kareem's idea and Antoine also. I had a mentor, Julie, and the way that she spoke about a similar context, because if you're creating an art piece, you're creating a container of sorts, right? And she described it as uh, knowing your notness is important to understanding your isness, right? So you need to understand both, right? Because those two dynamics, opposing dynamics, help create the boundary, that container that you're bringing forth, right, in your art piece. So maybe if I want an art piece to be happy or something, maybe I'm not going to use as many dark colors. That's maybe the notness versus the isness. So Kareem, I love that idea. Thank you for bringing that up.
knowing one's notness is as equally important as knowing the isness to create that boundary. Yeah, that's on point. Yeah, Antoine and I were talking about that kind of creating those boundaries, and I think it's also part of um, um, the creative act, right? When he talks about Rick Rubin talking about conscious consciously choosing boundaries or restrictions um, that highlight those notness, right? In order to create the boundary, and it's an interesting level of freedom that it allows, or that container. Wow, it's such a beautiful imagery that you painted, and how you described it, Letitia, right? Because it does really just those containers and those boundaries does create a container, right? There's the notness, um, and it does allow for this unique level of freedom of play, um, which yeah, it's almost like creating a playground and just putting the fences around the playground. It's like this is the playground right here, and then kids can just go wild in the playground. You don't have to worry about it. It's just like it's just it creates a level of okay, um, to allow for creativity to kind of emerge in some way, which I would imagine that's also maybe connected to the idea of discipline as well. Um, yeah, possibly. David, and then we have Latifa.
Um, Something you said in the beginning, Osama, and I was trying to find it in the text and I couldn't find it, but this idea about the intention and the skill is, maybe I'm misunderstanding, is not necessarily the thing that brings the experience. I don't know if that's how, those weren't the exact words you said, but
Yeah, something like I think it was
I remember getting that from the reading,
yeah.
and it really didn't sit well with me. And so I've been kind of like, okay, all right, maybe the intention, I get it. And like, it's certainly true that I've witnessed raw art produced with very little skill that was incredibly touching and moving. But I'm going to give an example. I remember when I was younger and I saw first Basquiat piece. It was we went to some museum in Brooklyn. I was young, with my mom. We went to some museum in Brooklyn and I saw this piece. And I just remember thinking, like, I was like, oh, it's like something I drew in my classroom or something like that. It was on this piece of wood. It was kind of like real little kid sort of vibe, character, kind of sticky looking with paint sort of drizzled here and there and odd colors and stuff. And the texture of the wood was real raw. Like he just pulled it out of garbage, right? And just kind of went, bleh, And then I learned a little bit more about Basquiat. It just sort of fueled that. Well, oh, he was high all the time, blah, 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 blah. And then I saw this documentary where I got to watch him paint. And it floored me that the amount of skill that went into his intention was so just perfect. Like you could tell, like he wanted it to look exactly like that. The way he moved, it was so fluid and just, it was like, all right, this guy knows exactly what he's doing. And, witnessing that like opened this whole world to me, especially with his art, but then art way beyond his art. And, and I'm just, this is coming from a person who's, I won't say I dislike visual art, but I'm not like heavily invested in like constantly looking at visual art. That's a weak side of my appreciation of the arts. Um, so I'm thinking about this idea of skill, you know, and an artist, what it means to do art is a lifelong endeavor in learning how to be skillful in your expression. And that requires you to go really deep into yourself. And just what like Letitia was saying is knowing what you are and what you aren't. And in some sense, you can even change that. You can see how malleable you are through that process, right? That's self-cultivation to an extent, you know. Now, am I saying all artists are leading towards enlightenment? Not necessarily, you know, but it's this sort of mechanism of I have this yearning. Something is trying to come out. And it's ineffable. I don't know. So maybe I can put a feeling on it sometimes, either sadness, anger, happiness, whatever. Sometimes I can't. And so what I'm sort of trying to do is like, okay, well, I have this meat body that can do things. Let me try and learn how to use that to sort of get this out. And in that process, it's like an external, internal, external, internal. You're sort of always going out and then coming back in, going out, coming back in, you know, and it's this constant exchange. And when I see a piece of art, you know, I'm trying to, as we're all talking, I was thinking is like, am I recognizing the skill? Am I recognizing the profundity of what they're like, the subject that they're sharing? It's all of that, you know, but it takes skill. It takes incredible skill to do that. And even if I'm getting something they didn't intend, it still took an incredible amount of skill to create this experience, right? And so what was it? The question I had was, is meaning the same as experience, right? So if an artist says there's a specific meaning to this painting, but I get a totally different meaning out of it, it's still this experience. They're creating this experience. Now I'm thinking like Rothko, right? Where it's like you walk into this space and just whoa, colors and all of these shapes and things, just sort of, there's no words, there's no sentences, there's barely even sort of like, you know, like anthropomorphic shapes or anything. It's just the way in which space has been manipulated to create this overwhelming experience. And that takes incredible skill. And sometimes that skill is accidental, but it's still skill because it's accidental as a result of a lifelong process of like looking at yourself. So I guess I kind of like got a little, I was like, what? Skill is not important. Wait a second. But like, there's something like I truly like, for example, I love photographs that come from children who like walk around a party and take pictures of like people's nostrils or like just sort of random shots. And those are so beautiful because you're seeing everything through this such innocent experience. And I'm not trying to get this good shot, you know, I'm just showing what I'm seeing, you know, and you have this experience of this child walking around. So that's profound too. And there's no like intentional skill there, you know. So I'm not trying to say it's not this or that, but I am saying skill is incredibly important for higher levels of expression. And I appreciate the skill. That's something like when I see art, I'm like, whoa, you know, like, or I hear a piece of music, even something that's so simple, and you just hear how well placed the spaces, you know, like we were talking about what Karim was saying, and we were talking about how do you, it's not just what you put on the paper, but it's how that relates to the negative space within the paper, right? So if you look at like Zen paintings where it's just a stalk of bamboo with a leaf, and it just goes, and it's not even very detailed. It's literally just a brushstroke, pause, brushstroke, pause, brushstroke, pause. And that's it. But the way they placed it, the way it sort of interacts with the white space on the paper, it just conveys this whole feeling, and you have an experience from it, you know? And I'll stop there.
No, that's amazing, bro. And yeah, we have Letitia saying that art can be constant self-referral loop, which is kind of this idea of um, this working on the skill, right? And consciously just developing that discipline, and in order to, right, this is something that Antoine mentioned, you know, but maybe in a different context, the gap, right? That of what's inside that needs to be expressed, and how well does it match? How well does the art itself match this original idea that's intended, right? And the smaller the gap between these two, and that gap gets smaller with skill and discipline, you know, to your point, David, right? And the masters make it seem so effortless that anybody can look at it and be like, that's easy, I can do that, right? Like a short Rumi poem using words that are super simple and super easy, and it's like, oh, I could have wrote that, right? But it's like, you know what I mean? Similar with painting, similar with music or certain things, you know. And to your point, I remember talking to Naz earlier when we were discussing, you know, this reading beforehand, and kind of it's the same thing I expressed less like with children, you know, children painting something, and most of the time if they're painting their family, somehow maybe they paint, you know, the mother much larger than the father, and it's like it's almost the size of the house, right? And the father and the, or you know, whoever, it depends, but it really, it's saying something. They don't know what it's saying, but it definitely is saying something, right? Um, yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And Letitia also offered maybe it may sit better if we replace the word skill for intention, um, and having those, which yeah, absolutely. Latifa, and then Kareem will, because I know Latifa was waiting before, and then we'll go to Kareem.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure listening to everybody talk about their experience, and lots of things have been triggered through. But the last one was when we were talking about boundaries, and I really relate to that in two ways, two personal experiences. One was in an art foundation course I was doing. We were given three, or no, probably more than that, about 4 or 5 words, like for sculpture, to do a sculpture project, like pour and tear and cut and things like that. You had to use those words in order to create. And it was one of the best things I came up with, because I had certain boundaries, but it gave me direction. And I think what it did was remove. I was more concentrated on that than producing something that was good, you know, or what I, you know, perceived as being sculpture, or in my mind. And the same really with creative writing. A little group I belonged to, when we were given certain words to put into a poem or a piece of writing, or taking certain things out of a piece of writing, like adjectives or something like that. Don't write a piece without adjectives. Those kind of boundaries are, it's just amazing, I find, for allowing a process to happen. And I was also thinking about, I have thought about this for a long time, since I heard somebody say about a ballet dancer. You know, they go through absolutely years and hours of holding a pose, training all their muscles. And then I heard somebody say, well, what that does is give me complete freedom in the end, because I don't have to think about, can my muscles do this? I know what they can do. So I can just put my whole self into it. Yeah. That's sort
Gorgeous.
of, mm.
Yeah, freedom through discipline. I mean, that's a thing that, Antoine and I have spoke about this for a long time, for a long time. And, as creatives, there's this desire for mastery and to become skillful, right? Kind of to your point, David, and now what you're bringing up, Latifa, these boundaries. And I love what you said, giving that boundary gave you direction, right? It paints the road almost. It's like, okay, here, this is the road. This is the sidewalk here. There's a sidewalk there. No go. You can't drive on the sidewalk. You can't drive on the sidewalk. Drive here. Um, and in certain contexts, discipline can sometimes be viewed maybe not in a so um, you know, uh, like in a good light, right? Um, but there's definitely and knowing these disciplines, knowing these internally, knowing that kind of what Letitia was saying, the knots and the isness, um, in order to get into a state, which is very similar to meditation, right? This is why art and meditation kind of like go so hand in hand. It's like getting into a place where the mind it just shuts, like that's it, no more. It's the body and the presence just takes over. Um, so I absolutely love that. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Latifa. Kareem.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's just a question that I have that came to me as David was speaking, so I won't be mumbling for long because I just wouldn't know what to say. It's something about the childlike innocence about taking the pictures, and then it got me thinking, like, when does the process of intentionality kicks in, and how do we know that the child, for example, intended uh, to do just like, how do we know their intention isn't like to be like, well, my intention is to show people what I'm seeing. Like, how do we know that that's not a deliberate thing, that they didn't say, well, the picture could be better, or maybe like, how do they think about what is a better picture? So like, what is the thought process for a child and how that manifests itself? Because something else that's been percolating in my mind, but I won't bring it up because I don't, a lot of controversial issues like are in my mind, but yeah, I keep them in a safe place there, so I don't cause any trouble. But like a lot of cultural stuff have something to do with like the children, and they're like, well, the child intended to tell me this. So how do we know? Like, how do we interpret that childlike intention if it is actually an intention? And what do we mean exactly when we say like child innocence or childlike innocence? And when does that point manifest itself where the child is now, I'm intentionally making this? Like, how does that transition happen? And is there a point in time where we say, aha, that or this is the moment where like the intention is happening? If that makes any sense. I think it would be interesting if someone has any feedback on that.
I think David may have.
I don't know how many people here have raised a child or spent time with children. But one thing, like, young children will do is they'll draw a picture and they'll come up to you and show it to you as if it is the best thing on the planet. And they will look at how you react to the picture. And how you react to the picture affirms for them what they think, or opposite. So one of the things, like, I used to have this conversation with my daughter a lot, where she would take all the colors and just, and I'm going to add this. Oh, that looks pretty cool. Okay, cool. And then I'm going to add this. Oh, that looks cool. And eventually it's just brown, the entire page covered in brown. Right. And then I'm like, okay, so, like, like, maybe we can try and, like, distinguish colors a little bit more. Like, let's just not mix. You notice, like, if we just mix all the colors together, we just keep getting brown, And it's like, from that conversation, I've just kind of, like, shut her down. Like, she's thinking, I did art and this is great. And I'm like, yeah, no, this isn't quite art. Like, what I'm saying to her is like, no, not quite. And so then the next thing she doesn't mix all the colors together. Maybe she makes a couple circles and doesn't, and then she comes and she's looking for the approval. Is this right? Is this good art? Right? And so that's kind of like the intention building, right? So originally she just had no intention. It was just to throw things on the paper or whatever, sometimes on her face, her clothes, the table, the cat. Just have fun, right? Interact with me. And then little by little, it becomes this sort of like, okay, what I just did there, that's not approved of, or that's not considered good, right? Or she might say, well, I don't care, and she's rebelling against it. But still, there's an intention there. And that intention came about through that sort of affirmation, this back and forth exchange, where what we mean by childlike innocence is like, a blank screen. There's a lack of sort of like self-awareness there to some extent, sort of building that self-awareness into them through these interactions of positive and negative affirmations. I mean, at least that's my sort of educator-based view on these things. I don't know if someone wants to add to that.
I saw. Should I go now, or well? I think I saw Abe. Your hand was up, and I spoke twice already, so I don't want to. I would rather you go first if I did in fact see your hand up. Abe, are you there?
I am there. Yeah, you can go.
Um. Okay.
You may
You
say the same thing I'm about to say.
okay? I don't know. Maybe not, because I might. You sure you don't want to go? Because I might take it. Talking about that, but I might take it a slightly different direction. So you want to go first?
Okay.
Okay.
So the one thing that kind of comes up to Kareem for your question, for me, I'm not sure if you ever heard this saying, the child creates from wonder, the sage from awareness, but both draw from the same well. Have you ever heard that? Now, the
No,
reason
I
why
mean, I might
that
have heard
is,
something similar, but no, I don't think so.
yeah, everything is just an iteration of the same thing anyway. But the thing that I'm trying to point to is you asked such an important question, in my opinion, and it's stirring up a lot of things for me. The thing that I noted down, because I was trying to jot down as much notes of what was coming up for me in that question, is I think that children often create without or with, I don't know, self-consciousness, however that looks like, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no intentionality. I think our concept of intentionality, maybe as an adult, may morph and it may be refined to one point. But intentionality, similar to skill, is a multiplicity in how it unfolds. So, an intention and how that may be demonstrated from a child's lens, more often than not, appears to be embodied, it appears to be felt, it appears to almost be immediate. And I think as we age or mature or immature on the spectrum of growth, there is this fascination that it has to look the way that we think it needs to look. But I think it always morphs in such a profound way. But that's the one thing that I noted down really fast was that saying, the child creates from wonder, the sage from awareness, but they both draw from the same well. And true art, then, in that sense, whatever art can be, is essentially born when innocence and intentionality meet, regardless of the age and stage of an individual. And there's this sense of, I'm going to use this word in a very non dogmatic way, purity about that. And there's remembrance, because more often than not, when I see musicians, artists, or poets, or psychologists, or therapists, or janitors, or plumbers, or burger flippers, or the garbage men and garbage women, a stewardess or not, whatever the art form is that they're doing in that lens of service and stewardship, there's this beautiful play of remembrance. And at the same time, there's reverence in the same act. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's something that's kind of coming up for me throughout that process. So I don't know if that answers it, but I don't even know if I'm attempting to answer it. I don't have an answer.
What's your intention, brother?
Ah, play. Play and
Yeah, I know.
exploration.
Yeah. You bring up something interesting because now you tie it into the adulthood. And now it makes me think like, why is it that us as adults, if we create something just out of the blue because we feel like it, that's frowned upon? You know what I mean? Like it's I can't do that. Or can I
Antoine.
do it? I don't know.
Oh,
Yeah,
Um,
sure you can. But
I was
go
going to
ahead,
say that I
Antoine.
wanted Antoine to go.
um, I second what Osama said. Like, yes, you can. And if you haven't been invited, I'm inviting you, bro. Play. If you find a space, play. A safe space, you know? And Abe, damn, bro. Like you like bars heavy. You drop bars, bro. That quote was fire. Can you say it one more time?
The quote is, the child creates from wonder, the sage from awareness, but they both draw from the same well.
And who's that by?
I have no idea.
That is gorgeous. That is gorgeous.
Somebody who copied it over time and over time.
Wow. Um, man, there was okay, so I wanted to speak to this topic, right? But I wanted to relay it to something that I found in the material. And the pages, oh, the pages are numbered. Okay. It's on page 4. And um, the thing is, I can't find the link of how I related it to what we were discussing. I can't remember it any longer, but it was something about someone had said something about the, I'm paraphrasing, right? Because I don't remember the exact words, but it had something to do around like the conditioning of the environment and um, and what it does to us as people, but as children, as artists, and how what's coming out. There's this relationship between, you know, between what we are, what's essentially us, and what wants to unfold out of us, but also what the world has conditioned inside of us, and how that is playing in the same space with what we create. And on page 4, I think this author speaks to something about this that he's calling, Osama or Abe, help me in my pronunciation, or Latifa, muwakos.
Oh,
Um,
Muwakkals.
muwakos. And I'll
Yeah.
just read this section and speak a little bit about how I connect am connecting it to this conversation. So it says on page 4, it is these entities that are called, in Sufi terms, muwakkals, which means elementals. They live, they have a certain purpose to accomplish. They're given birth by man, and behind them there is a purpose to direct their life. Imagine how terrible it is if, in a moment's absorption, a person expresses his wrath, his passion, his hatred. A word expressed at such a moment must live and carry out its purpose. It is like creating an army of enemies around oneself, Perhaps one thought has a longer life than the other. It depends upon what body has been given to it. If the body is stronger, then it lives longer. On the energy of the mind, the strength of the body of that thought depends. This section right here, one way I can talk about this is like how these elementals, whether, and I don't know whether this term is used both in a positive light or negative light, um, but when I think of it in terms of the energies and the conditionings that we send out in society, like the collective consciousness that we're all moving, being born into, the social climate that's happening right now, at least in the US. Um, for example, let's say if I'm on Instagram all the time and the way the algorithm is set up is that I'm seeing always negative things pop up, right? And so I look at these elementals, and I don't know if this is correct, but like as these impressions from the outside world or the environment that we're existing in, um, building over time and taking up residency in my mind or in my physiology in such a way that it's having an effect on my psychology or my emotions, which translate into my art, which translate in not only the art of me singing or me drawing or my poetry, but the art of life. How am I relating and communicating, connecting with myself, with the world? All these things can be influenced by these subtle, what I'm calling subtle energies that are always influencing us. And so when it speaks about these elementals, I'm realizing that like if this is something that is existing, whether it's on the positive version, like let's say, for example, maybe Instagram, my algorithm brings me positive things, and maybe that positive energy is building up. And so now it's having a reverse effect on the other side of the spectrum where my art is being influenced by that, as well as what's going on inside of me. I'm feeling like I can't exactly remember the bridge to how I connected it to what we were talking about earlier, but I do know I wanted to point this out and see what you all thought about these things, the elementals playing a role in our life, in our art, how we create, how we relate to one another, whether you think it's a thing or not, and stuff like that. I hope that was clear. I can't remember the bridge I had, but maybe to come back at some point.
Yeah, for sure. Um, and yeah, those are those elementals as far as like um having life of their own or the influence, right? Until kind of like what you read, like, and they're gonna accomplish their purpose, right? They have a certain purpose to accomplish, and they're gonna take on um that role, kind of even to the point what David was saying, as far as kids and um you know hey, there, in whatever moment that affirmation or that negation, affirming in the positive or in the negative, they take out that form is taking place. And maybe we're more, I mean, I think we're just constantly susceptible, whatever the word is, receptive of that, susceptible, whatever the word, um, of those energies, right? Now, whether or not we're conscious of it, and the responsibility, kind of like in that same section that you read, the responsibility to maintain this inner kingdom, as Hazrat Inayat Khan painted, right? Maintaining this inner kingdom of thought and um, and being, so that when it is time for expression and it is time for outward action, that is coming from this, as Abe said, the use of the word pure, right? Intentionality or conscious action taking. Um, I think that's maybe where I see the um the bridge uh, taking place, at least. But I know Naz, raised her hand, as so I think she has something to say on that, or maybe something else.
No, I mean one thing that keeps coming to mind, even as David shared on his first share, that term that he kept using of skill. What kept coming to my mind as sort of an alternative term is style. So there's something that I've witnessed over the years, the way that we do things, the way that a child does something, takes photos or makes a work of art, the way that we um, get words onto a page, make marks on a page, get paint out. Um, yes, there's a certain level of mastery of your tools, right? That you can work on, that you can perfect what kind of paper, what kind of pencil to use and all of this kind of thing, and you can sort of master those tools. But what that thing that's called style is something that you can't help. And it is not in my experience of, having worked like as a creative director for so long and worked with so many different artists, I don't think style is so much in our control. I don't think that it's in our control. I think that that is our unique way of being. You can be conscious of making this mark on a page, and you can be conscious of, whatever like these words are and such. But at the end of the day, I feel like that skill level of like a child, for example, the way that they take photos, that's their style, right? Whether it's highly skillful or not, or it's out of the frame, the composition is off, or whatever it is, those are all just things that, as adults, our society has programmed to say, like, oh, this is a pleasing composition, right? But the kid is like, click, and whatever that click is, it's like that's their style. And so I don't know where I'm going with all that, but I just feel like that is something that has really been resonating with me a lot.
No, that's perfect. That's absolute perfect. And I think it's a good um tying the bow kind of, because I know it's over 9:30, and um it's over the mark of the hour and a half, and I think this is a good place to um wrap this conversation up, because it leaves it leaves this idea of, which is what Abe shared in his quote, right? This dance between wonder and awareness, right? And to allow for that style, as you're describing it, Naz, to just naturally come to the surface and manifest and express itself, even if, and I love how you put it also, is this mastery of the tools, right? That's so um practical. That's such a practical way of saying it. Mastery
That's
of
all that
tools,
it is. It's just a mastery of tools. Yeah.
right? It's such a beautiful thing, and everything else just becomes the style, the point of view, the what is to be expressed, and the way that it's being expressed. So this style is yeah, yeah. And that's the thing, like to be in that space, if the boundaries are the wonder and awareness, and to have style, um move in that direction. It's I think that's such a beautiful way to allow for this space. I didn't know, no pun intended. Um, allow, creating the space to, um, yeah, to express and to play, right? And for the archetype of the artist and the archetype of the sage, right? Who's moving every action with consciousness and with awareness to create with the freedom to be in wonder and with the freedom to play and with the freedom to know what she's not and what she is, and to move in that freedom and to allow for that style, like you said, which is the fingerprint of the being. It's the individuation of the being, to allow for that uniqueness to be highlighted and just be experienced not only firsthand, but also mirrored through through community, and hopefully, God willing, the divine itself mirroring it back to us. So that's such a beautiful way to kind of end this, Naz. So thank you so much for that input. I know it's over that 9:30 mark. I love you all. This was so fruitful. And every insight that's shared here is a teaching moment in and of itself. So,
Yeah.
and I say this all the time. It's like such a lucky, I feel so lucky just to be surrounded by amazing teachers in this space. And hopefully whoever is catching this replay and watching this can get great value, as hopefully we all did. So I really appreciate y'all. The next open book club will be the last Wednesday of April,
Yeah.
which will be, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, no, not the last Wednesday, because the last Wednesday would be April 30th. It'll be April 23rd, the fourth Wednesday. And that topic, the reading is not yet set up, but that topic is going to be around sexuality, and spirituality, I guess, or just sexuality. I'm not sure just yet. Antoine is fine-tuning some reading material for us.
Yes.
So, stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think we have any more announcement other than I love y'all and
Love
hopefully
y'all.
catch you. Yes.
Did you say that that's going to be the last book meeting?
No, the
Next.
Oh,
next
the
one.
next one, not the last one. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
no, we're going.
I might have to join you on this next one too.
Yes, please, please.
Please, welcome. Welcome.
Yes. God willing. Okay. Well, good night I know some of you are in Europe right now and in the
Me and
UK. So
Latifah.
yeah, you and Latifah are on a different time zone. So get some good sleep. Much love and appreciation to everyone here.
Thank you,
Love
everyone,
y'all.
for joining us. So good seeing y'all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.